Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephen Bartkus, the curator of the Gunn Historical Museum in Washington, Connecticut. Today is Tuesday, February 9th, 2021, and we thank you for joining us for a virtual meeting of the Washington History Club at night. For those of you who are new to the History Club meetings, these are not lecture presentations, but rather a group discussion about an hour long where we all informally discuss the history of Washington Depot, Washington Green, Marbledale, New Preston, and Woodville. We encourage you to share your stories and memories with the group, or if you prefer, you can just listen to the fascinating conversation about our town's past. We also encourage you to show your related photos and objects to the group. The topic of tonight's meeting is Washington Winters Then and Now. We hope to chat with you about life in Washington during winters past, including your winter activities, sledding spots, skiing, ice skating, games, clothing, home and school life, and things we did or didn't do then that we do now. During this meeting, which is being recorded and will be archived at the museum, your video settings will remain on, but we'll keep you muted to minimize the background noise until you'd like to join in the conversation. We ask that you please raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and then we'll try to unmute you. It's important that only one person speak at a time so everyone can hear what's being discussed. If you have questions or comments and you'd rather not speak, you can also type them throughout the meeting in the chat box. Also note on the top right of your screen, there's a button that allows you to switch between gallery view and speaker view so you can see everyone else in this meeting. Please note that the museum's next virtual presentation is A Mid-Century Artist's Haven and the Early Days of the Washington Art Association with guest lecturer Sarah Griswold on Monday, February 22nd at 6:30. Please mark your calendars and register for this interesting program on the Gunn Museum's website. Our moderator this evening is Dimitri Rimsky. He grew up in Washington and attended Washington Elementary and High School. Over the years, he has been involved in many town activities and organizations. In addition to serving on the town's COVID-19 response committee, he is currently a member of both the Planning Commission and the Historic District Commission. He works as a house painter and is also an occasional poet. Now, I'd like to hand the program over to Dimitri.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm so glad to see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces. I'm going to be counting on some of you that I see here to contribute some of your stories because I can't talk for an hour. I'm going to run out of things to talk about and I'll have to start making stuff up. And that might be entertaining, but it's not going to be that informative about the history of the town. I also want to make sure that those of you who want to contribute, and I really encourage you to do so, if your video isn't on and you're waving, we aren't going to see you. So enter something into the chat that says that you have a question or you'd like to contribute something. And that way we know that you're there and we can acknowledge you and unmute you and you can contribute. And as Stephen said, if you're not familiar with Zoom, more than one person is talking at a time, you don't know what anybody's saying. So let's all see what we can do to cooperate on this. I don't think the irony of the fact that if this was an in-person meeting, we would have had to cancel it because it's snowing and none of us would have been able to get to the library tonight. So it's ironic that we can meet by Zoom and still have a discussion about the history of winter. I think that's actually really fascinating. And of course, we did pick a nice snowy night to do that. So most of you are socked in as well. So I hope that you have a good chance to talk about some of your experiences in wintertime. There are a couple of things, and I wanted to mention right off the bat. There's been a lot of discussion on Facebook about the picture that Mary Bronson posted. I see Mary is there. Yes, Mary. She posted this wonderful picture of something that I'd completely forgotten, which was that her family had set up a ski slope off of Sabbath Day Lane, and her father had come up with this ingenious rope tow, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mary, was run by a tractor pulling the rope up and down the hill. I think Mary can probably give us more details about that. But Mary, I'd like you to just give us a little story about how that all came about, if you don't mind.
I wasn't prepared, but I'll give it a shot, Demi. It was in the winter of 60 to 61, when my dad said, you know, we need to do something to entertain the kids. And he took a tractor and parked it up on top of a hill, took the axle and made an attachment to one of the wheels. And we went up to Mohawk Mountain and got rope tow that they were no longer using, Mohawk Mountain ski area. And he put together this, what we thought was a fabulous rope tow. And there was discussion about whether you could charge for admission, and that would require insurance. So it was, no, we're not going to charge, it's free. You know, there was a little contribution box. It was one of those old plastic freezer containers that he had nailed to a post, and you could put money in it if you wanted to. And we just skied. It was probably only on weekends, but it was long enough ago that I don't remember the finer details of it. I had intended to send a whole bunch of pictures to you to add to this, but they were really old and they were very faint, and I'm not sure it would have added anything. But on Sundays, there were typical picnics there. And I've got pictures of oh my goodness, Helen DeCourcy and all of the, not all of the DeCourcy kids, but certainly two of the boys, and I can't tell them apart at this point. But standing around with plates of food and the moms holding babies. And my sister, who is also on this call, was just a few months old the first year we had it. And we wrecked the tractor, some part of it, and Dad switched wheels and wrecked that, and then did it some other way, but it was great fun.
Well,
and we had one catastrophe.
Which was?
Nate Chatfield, who lived up the hill from us, had a fall, and I believe it was a spiral break of his leg. And we took our little toboggan up the hill, put him on it, brought him back down the hill, and somebody got him to the hospital. And he's still alive today, I think.
Well, I think it's just great because I was never a skier. Skiing, first of all, requires having skis, and they're expensive. So that was prohibitive. But I didn't know of any other ski area or a place where people in Washington skied as on any kind of regular basis, or even at all, other than cross-country skiing. Maybe people did, but the only other ski area locally, of course, for a while was Tapawingo, which was on 47 between here and Woodbury. Right. And pardon?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and later it became Woodbury Ski and Racket. And my experience with Tapawingo was being a lounge boy and hanging out in the lodge and staying close to the fire and drinking cocoa and flirting. So that was as much skiing as I ever did. But you mentioned Mohawk. Did you ski regular? Anybody else here ski regularly at Mohawk or ski? Yeah, Susie?
Well, Demi, I can tell you, and probably a lot of people who are on this Zoom agree that whenever schools were canceled, we just loaded up the car and headed off to Mohawk or Butternut Basin or any of the ski areas that were semi-local. Butternut, I think, was in Massachusetts. But, my dad, who was a dairy farmer, the cows didn't need milking during the day, and we would just not mind the snow on the roads, and we would just take off as a family and go skiing. And certainly the skiing at our hill, which we called Wapatango sort of as a I guess it was disrespectful to Tapawinga, but we were really scrappy skiers. We weren't like high class or anything. We just had fun.
Mary, we have a question in the chat box from someone who's wondering if you could describe the exact location of where the tow rope was located.
Oh, the tow rope was located on Sabaday Lane. If you look at the picture that was on the website, it looks from the top of the hill, at the top of the ski area, down towards the farm that my dad ran, which was Davies Hollow Farm. And that's on Sabaday Lane, which tees up to Romford Road. And the house that we grew up in was on Romford.
Yeah,
I don't know if that helps or not.
Well, if you look at the photo, and if you're familiar at all with Sabaday Lane, if you're coming up from Romford Road, you would pass the farm on barns on your left, and the road swings around and starts up a small grade, and the hill would have been to your right as you're driving up Sabaday Lane, and the tow line would have been along that hillside. If you're coming from the other direction, then it's on your left before you get to the farm and the curve at the bottom of the hill. In the picture, you can clearly see the Bronson farm at the bottom of the hill. It's very identifiable. So if you're driving around town, take a cruise. And I don't know, I think that hillside is probably fairly overgrown. There may even be a house on it now.
No, it's still a hill. The house at the bottom of the hill was a house that my parents built for their hired hand at the time. And the Osbergs lived there when the rope tow was in existence. And then Rose Saxon rented it for years and years and years. And then when my grandparents died, the house went to my mother's sister, Franny Laird McGatt, and it now is owned by Franny's daughter, my cousin Tilly Laird Brown. So Tilly and Hunter, they live in the house at the bottom of the hill, but the whole hill is still empty. And if you know the Hubbard family, if you're going down Sabaday Lane, Hubbards are on the left, and then you start going down the hill, and it's still an open pasture. And that's where the rope tow was.
Well, it's a wonderful picture, and it was a great inspiration for the starting of this conversation, because it was such a charming insight into Washington and the kind of improvisational things that went on. I vaguely remember the Chatfield boys' injury for some reason. I think because injuries were sort of a known thing when somebody got hurt doing something. Word got out that somebody had an accident. I remember, maybe somebody in town here will remember, I think Chris McCarthy, the McCarthy family, had a terrible sledding accident and almost died. I see Susie shaking her head.
My brother was with him at the golf course when he had that accident.
Really? You were?
No, my brother David.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was sledding at the golf course?
Yep.
Yeah, I just remember it being almost fatal, and yeah, and that was one of the things about sledding in general, is that if you look at a sled, you realize that it's a fairly lethal weapon. I mean, it's not exactly a sort of a safety device. I mean, it's nowhere near as safe, although you could steer it as a saucer or some of these fiberglass things that kids play on now. But, taking a flyer, that's what we used to call them, you had to really know what you were doing. I'll try to give you two little stories about sledding in my experience. Most of the time when we were growing up, and this was in the 50s, kids, if you couldn't find a hill to sled on, you would make a trail to sled. especially if the snow was deep. You'd have to tramp down a trail so that the sled runners didn't get stuck in the snow. And sometimes that wasn't always the safest option because you would, so in two instances, one is Tim Cooney and I used to sled down Mahoney's Road. And Mahoney's Road runs off of 47 behind that house that's perched right on the side of the road, and it runs down to Barnes Road or School Street, and then sort of went by a red barn and where Randy, I think, used to live. And then I think that was that, I've forgotten the name of that. It used to be a bridge. I don't think it was, whatever it was.
Moody Bridge.
Anyhow, pardon?
Moody Bridge.
Moody Bridge, that's it. So anyhow, Tim and I used to sled down that road because in those days, the plows weren't exactly efficient. So they'd always leave a skim of snow, pretty much. There wasn't a lot of sanding going on. And if you really were ambitious, Tim and I would sometimes run the garden hose a little bit just to give it a little bit more. Yeah. And then at the bottom of the hill, it makes a very steep left-hand curve. And we would spend a good deal of time banking that curve up so that we wouldn't have to slow down. We could just zoom right around that curve and keep on going, of course, which was great. And so we were doing that and we would have been having a good time. And you were going very, very fast. I mean, it was really stupid, but fun. And you would zoom around that corner and you would shoot across School Street and you would shoot down past Randy's house. And the object is whoever could get as far out on the ice on the river, the better. So, I mean, that's what made you the winner of that run, is if you actually broke ice on the edge of the river. So anyway, I was going down and I went shooting across School Street. And as I did, I looked to my right and there's Luxie coming up the road in the grader. And I just shot across in front because I was going so fast. But Tim was behind me. And when I turned around to look to see where Tim was, he was still behind me. And he doesn't know to this day what he did, because he said he closed his eyes. So we don't know if he got between the blade and the wheels, if he got between the back wheels, if he came out fast enough in front of Luxie. I mean, Luxie wasn't moving very fast in the grader, but it's still, and that was the last time we did that run. We figured that we had really tempted our angels and that we shouldn't be doing that anymore. But yeah, Luxie never knew what happened. He just kept right on going up Barnes Road. He didn't even see us, I don't think. The other time is myself and the Addicts boys, and I think a few other kids, we tramped a trail down from the top of the hill here, all the way down to the Catholic Church through the snow, which was a great run. The only problem was that there was a stone wall at one point in the middle of that run. We had to sort of bank up snow to get over the stone wall. And when you did that, you had to sort of jump your sled to one side, otherwise you would run into a tree. And we were having a good time doing that until Walter Addicts didn't bank his sled enough and he went straight into the tree. And then his father and my father patrolled the trail and immediately forbid us to ever go down that trail again. But it was a great trail. The only problem is that you had to walk back up from the Catholic Church all the way back up the hill. And I'll finish with one other little story. Julia Baker, who used to live on the Green, a wonderful elderly lady, must have been in her 80s when I grew up. And some of you may have known her. She was quite a pip. And she told me about, she and all the kids on the Green would sled down the Green Hill. Well, in those days, there were horses. I mean, if you were lucky, maybe a car, but not too many, but mostly it was horses. So sledding down the Green Hill wasn't such a terrible thing. but it must have been great fun, I must say. And she had this wonderful expression, which I cherish to this day because it's just so priceless. She said we would be going lickety-brindle. And to this day, I think to myself, lickety-brindle? I mean, okay, a brindle's a horse. So you were going really fast like a brindle horse? I mean, it's charming expression, but the image of Julia Baker and probably Helen Worsby and God knows who else sledding down that hill in their sleds back in the turn of the century. So anyway, those are my sledding stories. And I'm glad that Chris McCarthy survived his. We all had our close encounters, that's for sure. Is anybody else on here? Did they ever go sledding? Did they have any stories of their sledding adventures? I see Mary's.
Hold on, Mary. Oops. Oh.
You have to unmute Mary. Mary, you're still muted. Hold on.
There you go.
I'm
There
not
you go.
technology savvy.
We could hear
Anyway,
you.
living in the depot, we used to go up on Fens Hill, which is now the George Washington Tavern, I think. Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
You know, and down that hill. And there was a bump in it. And that's where all the depot kids are, you know, all the kids from all ages. And there was a bump in it. And, you know, we'd build up, just like you said, you know, go faster. And if we could make it to the canal, that was really good. But that's where, you know, parents just let us go. We were little, big, everything. And that was our big thing to be. But I also did at night, you know, would walk up, not quite to the Catholic church, but partially up because the plows were slow in coming. And we'd do one run down the Green Hill before the plows. We were older, but not. We did it.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, one run.
Yeah, one run.
Yeah, because you'd have to go back to do two runs.
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, it was fun.
You mentioned going down that hill off the back of the GW to the canal. And what you're talking about is the diversion canal that used to run to the mills.
Right. That was always there. Yep. It wasn't filled with water to my knowledge, you know, then. But we never went down in it, but that was our goal, to make it to the canal.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, fun. Good times.
Oh yeah. Anybody else? No. I think Mary and both Marys, I have to say, pointed out something really pretty interesting, and that is we're talking about kids from 5 and 6 up to 10 and 12, 13. I mean, a menagerie of ages and children. Even older in my realm. Yeah. And you got home from school and you put on some boots or whatever and you were gone.
And you were gone.
And nobody was paying attention. I mean, it wasn't until something happened that parents decided that maybe they should find out what you were doing. But basically we were taking care of ourselves and we managed. I mean, here we are.
We used to go over to behind the town hall and ice skate that pond. That was before flood. And everybody from all ages, we'd all get in, crack the whip. I mean, big kids, little kids, and I hated to be on the end. Or Red Rover, there was always a fire going. And like you say, no parents said, we just said, oh, you know, and over we'd go. And then I remember Maureen Floyd's falling in though. Does anyone else remember? Somebody from town rescued her, but I can't remember, and I don't know who else to ask, but
she went through the ice.
Yeah. I don't know if it was one of the Swansons because they lived up, you know, behind on the other side. My brain is I just can't remember that. But I mean, that was the only time I ever heard anyone seriously injured, or she was all right, but anything happening at that, you know, but we skated and skated and skated. And it wasn't until after the flood when we had to go up to the gunnery ponds.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. The gunnery hockey ponds that were up on 47.
Right.
I mean, that was where we all skated, as I remember. And
well, you green people skated over there. The town people skated on behind the town hall.
Yeah,
There was two
once the-
separate factions there.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well,
It-
I just remember that I couldn't skate to save any, I mean, my ankles just, forget it, but I could skate enough to push the shovel. So I would push the shovel to clear the skating, but the minute the snow was off of it, I was like on my ankles most of the time. But Susie, did you skate on the Gunnery Ponds?
Me?
Yeah,
Oh, sure. There
yeah,
were
and
also
Mary,
two ponds
yeah,
down by what is now the pavilion behind the primary school. There were two ponds there.
oh, that's right, I forgot about them.
So I remember skating there a lot. And there was a nice warming house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, every once in a while I drive by those hockey ponds on the gunnery side and
Yeah.
I see that old shed basically holding on. I don't know how it's managed. But I remember, trying to get your skates laced up in there and yeah.
We have a
But-
question in the chat box from Alan. Were there ever any snowball fights in Washington? Any organized, between the depot or the green?
No.
Not
No.
official. I mean, I don't remember, and I just had this thought. Does anybody remember during recess, were we allowed to have snowball fights?
No, I don't remember.
We used to, when I probably dating myself way back, but we used to go and throw snowballs, but I don't think it was really a fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just remember, I was trying to remember what recess was like at the grammar school in those days. And I was drawing a complete blank. I don't remember. I'm sure they got us outside whether we wanted to go or not, but I don't remember what activities we had for recess during the winter.
You climbed the snowbanks there and played King of the Mountain.
Oh,
You know how
that's
the-
right. Yes, that's
and
right.
push each other off and slide down the banks. That's what we did on recess.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah.
Again, no chance of that happening now.
No.
Unfortunately.
We have another question in the chat box. If someone would like to explain in a little bit more detail this talk about two separate skating groups between the depot and the green.
All right. Well, I'll give it a little bit, and then Mary can chime in from the others. There always had been a town and hill social separation of sorts, and it was a combination of geography and to some extent economics, although that doesn't apply in my life. I just happened to live on the green in a barn, but that didn't mean I was doing any better. I still had cardboard in my shoes most of the time. So but there was a bit of a social distinction of quote unquote green kids and depot kids. And I think that that was a really unfortunate thing if I look back on it personally. I think it kept us from having the kind of friendships that we might have had if we hadn't had those divisions. But there was also a bit of a thing between New Preston and Washington. There was also later on between the Roxbury kids and Washington. By the time we were in high school, I think a lot of that had begun to erode. But there was that social identity. It was an awkward thing for a lot of us.
I don't think I ever noticed really. It was just geographically was the main thing. You didn't have cars, so the depot, everyone lived in that hollow, and we just played kick the can. Everyone got together, did whatever activities you wanted to. It was more that way, but in school, I don't ever remember in school, we all went to, there was only one first grade, one anything.
Yeah.
And to be honest, a lot of my friends live on the green. It wasn't that, it was geographically, you had to walk every place. You didn't have anyone to take you any place.
That's
so
right.
you walked, and you weren't going to go up the green hill, and they weren't going to come down. So
yeah. Yeah, I wanted to mention one thing that I remember about the winter, because we've had school closings, of course, the pandemic. But my recollection was that the buses in the snow had chains on them, and it didn't really matter if it was snowing or not. I mean, I can remember we used to meet at the Congregational Church, the kids that lived within walking distance of the church. Of course, nobody's parents waited for them at the corner of the drive or anything. You had to get to the bus stop, and the bus would come up the hill with chains, and we would get in and go down the hill, and then at the end of the day there would be chains on, and we would be going back. I don't remember too many times. Somebody had mentioned a couple of times when we had really, really big snows and the plows couldn't get through, and school was closed, but it was a rare thing in my recollection.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know anybody else went to school here, but I mean, Mary Bronson, you were a bit far out. Do you remember having buses with chains on them taking you in?
Sorry, I had to unmute.
Yeah.
I don't remember the chains. I do remember being able to watch the bus come down the hill across the valley. Then we knew to put our coats on and catch the bus. But I don't remember the specifics of how the bus got there in the winter, although I do know that whenever the phone rang in the morning, because you didn't have internet, you didn't have anything like that, or even the radio saying that your school was closed, or I don't think we ever had any delayed openings. I think we just either closed or opened during the winter. But when the phone rang, whenever it snowed, we'd be up early. Is the phone going to ring? Is the phone going to ring? Or is school going to be canceled? But I'm sorry, I don't remember chains on the buses.
I wonder if there was some kind of phone bank or phone chain set up back then. I was a child. Was there?
I think there was, yes.
So there would be a chain, and they would call out to different parents and different households.
Correct. And I think my sister just mentioned something about the late 70s, the school being closed for a week because of extra snow. But I wasn't there then, so.
Well, that must have been the blizzard. Yeah, was that 78? Does anybody remember 70? Was it 76, 78?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Demi,
Yeah.
I remember it was my senior year, and I'll date myself now. That was it was the winter of '69, and we had so much snow that the entire week was canceled of school.
Wow.
Monday through Friday in I don't know what month it was, February, maybe March, maybe of 1969, all week. Even my father, well, he always walked to Waterbury. I mean, drove to Waterbury, but he had to hitchhike to Waterbury every day until he could finally get his car out.
Well, you lived on a hell of a hill.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I can't imagine you getting up and down that hill if there was a good snow going.
Well, I'll tell you, in the bus, when we got the bus at the foot of the hill, we used to take our flyers and slide down to the foot of the hill, leave our sleds right there, and when we got off the bus in the afternoon, we just pulled the sleds back home with us.
Yeah.
Just left them all day.
Yeah, well, they weren't coming to get you, were they?
And Dad, he had to take a left going out of the driveway and go up the hill.
Oh.
So I don't know how he did it, but he did it every day.
Yeah. Well, that would make a little sense, because if he could go up and around on East Street, it would be a little bit flatter until he got down to.
He went down Plum Hill because Ron Wyatt lived on Plum Hill. That was always plowed.
Yeah. Oh, right. Of course.
That week of the snow, when the snow came off, was that week right after we had the February vacation, so we had 2 weeks off in a row.
Was that right? Oh my.
Yeah, that was always a big deal for me. I remember that.
I'd forgotten that.
Well, I was reminded of something when we were talking about snowplows, that there was a time, and I don't know if any of you remember this, they didn't have sanders on the backs of the trucks. And you would have a couple of guys in the back of the truck shoveling sand out as they drove. Does anybody remember that? Remember seeing that? Okay. Oh, Robert's waving his hand. Hold on, Robert, we're unmuting you. Yep, there
Yep.
you go.
Yeah, I grew up in Waterbury and I remember seeing that. Couple of guys standing up in the back of a dump truck shoveling sand out.
Yeah,
Then all of a sudden they had this spreader like a few years later, and I kind of like wondered, did I dream that? I think I saw it once.
no, you didn't dream it. I mean, I have a clear memory of it from a couple of different instances. My father used to work in New York, so he would come up on the train to New Milford on the weekends. And we would have some old jalopy that we would go and pick him up in. And of course, we're talking rear-wheel drive, so you're not talking about a particularly handy driving experience, especially on Route 109 going to New Milford. But I can remember coming back and it had been snowing, and we had to drive behind the plow truck, and those two guys were shoveling sand out in front of us the whole way from because it's a state road. They were shoveling sand out the whole way from wherever we caught up to them all the way into Washington Depot. And I can remember, and it was snowing while they were doing it. And I can remember looking at them and thinking, I don't ever want that job. I mean, I gotta hand it to them. I mean, that's some hardy guys working that.
Work. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how we ever managed to drive around in those old cars in the snow. I can remember it. I don't know if any other, Mary, maybe some of the other kids in town remember this, but I can remember my mother, and of course that's my mother, but I can remember her taking me down to the school parking lot to teach me how to drive in the snow. And there used to be other kids that would do that, and they would go down to the school parking lot and do donuts and learn how to correct the skid. And a lot of times there were parents with them teaching them how to drive. Does anybody else remember that, or is that just me?
Yeah, I did that.
You did that?
It was fun as hell.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that was, I mean, it's a charming part of our recollections of childhood here, growing up here, is that we had those sort of communal experiences where, you would go down there and there'd be half a dozen families skidding around on the parking lot. And nobody ever seemed to think that was odd. Seemed to be perfectly normal thing to do.
We have a question in the chat box about winter activities on Lake Waramag, and let's throw New Preston in there.
Yeah.
I don't want to put Keith on the spot, but I see we have Keith. If he wants to. Keith, do you want to join in?
My skating skills were limited.
Was there a favorite sledding spot in New Preston?
Not for me. I can't remember any. I know Doug McCann and one of the Woodruff boys used to sled on Bob Woodruff's road back there. There was quite a good hill once part of that.
Yeah, Doug McCann told me that he and one of the Woodruffs did New Preston Hill a couple of times and almost killed themselves and decided better.
I've heard that story too.
Yeah.
Going back to the school buses, with chains and whatever. One year when Beebrook Road was being rebuilt, the bus from New Preston had to go up over Baldwin Hill. The bus driver's name was Charlie McGinnis. If anybody remembers him.
Yep, yeah.
He had an awful time coming down into the depot. When he got to the school, he got off and he jumped all over Paul Bordeaux, who was responsible for it. Paul wasn't used to have people jumping on him, but
No, he wasn't. Yeah, Mr. Bordeaux was not one to have experience being taken down by somebody, but it was probably a good experience
he
for
was
him.
that day.
I think Fran Hodges used to bring the bus up from Roxbury. And before that, there was a bus that was called the Silver Top, which for some reason had a silver top to it. That's where it got its name. But the bus from Roxbury was a pretty big size bus, if I remember. I don't know if anybody else took that bus off the green that's on here. But I always thought of them coming all the way from Roxbury, and damn it, he was always on time too. And I was always late. So I ended up usually having to either run to catch it or ended up walking down the damn hill to get to school. And I ended up being late for school constantly as a result. So.
We have another question in the chat box about ice fishing. Has anyone ever gone ice fishing in Washington on Lake Waramag?
That was my question.
Oh,
Would love to
okay,
know,
there you go,
because
Peter.
we usually see 2 or 3 people ice fishing on Lake Waramag. And the other day, Barbara and I drove past Bantam Lake, and there must have been 20 or 30 groups of people ice fishing on Bantam Lake. And just wondered what it's like, whether you ever catch anything, what the day is like out on the lake. And Dimitri, you being the source of information, we were sure you would know.
I can only contribute 2 things. One is that Bantam Lake is shallow and freezes better. I think Lake Waramag hasn't actually totally frozen over. Mount Tom sometimes is frozen pretty well, and there's usually ice fishermen on it. I know that Bantam Lake used to have ice sailing. I don't know what their technical name is for that, but they used to have a couple of sailboats would be outfitted with skates or skis, and they would.
Didn't they have races or something?
Absolutely, yeah, they did. Yeah, they had, but my only comment about ice fishing is I have yet to understand it as a sport. I mean, I have enough trouble staying warm. Why would you go out on a freezing lake in the middle of winter and go through all that trouble risking your life for a fish that would just as be happy staying under the ice? I honestly don't understand it. I suspect bad marriages as one excuse. I have no idea. I really don't understand it. And they take heaters out with them, which also doesn't make any sense to me. It's a fascinating preoccupation. I wish there was an ice fisherman here that would explain it to us, because it's always baffled me.
My brothers used to do that. They'd go fishing and hunting in the winter and ice fishing and stuff like that. It was never my thing, but they were always tramping off into the snow doing that kind of stuff.
Did they ever explain to you why they wanted to go ice fishing?
I think it was to get out of the house.
Now I've seen a lot of ice fishermen up on Waramag, the upper end, almost to the water line. But again, I don't know why they get out there either.
Well,
Doesn't it always freeze better on the upper end? Because I think it's
I think so.
shallower there.
yeah, it wasn't frozen. It wasn't solidly frozen in the last week. I don't know when Peter drove around it. Did you see it frozen, Lake Waramag?
No, but Bantam Lake was
Yeah.
absolutely solidly frozen.
Yeah. Well, that's why there was an ice, that was why the ice factory was on Bantam Lake back in the, whenever it was. They used to harvest ice out of that lake for years, right, Stephen?
Yeah, I think until the big ice house burnt down on Bantam Lake. And there were ice houses here in Washington too. I think there was an ice house where the casino was located on Lake Waramag,
Uh-huh.
and where the Washington Town Beach is at one point. I think there might have been an ice house. And of course, right in the depot, there was the ice house next to the pond that Mary talked about ice skating on, where the town hall is today. And that was, I think, connected to the Borden's milk processing plant that was there. That ice that was harvested from the pond kept the milk cold when it was put on the trains to New York City.
Yeah, one of the things that we, speaking of winter activities, is that before refrigeration, harvesting ice was a necessity, and all manner. I mean, most farms. I mean, even my house. I have a little building next door, which was the ice house, and it was one of the only ways that people could preserve food for any length of time, other than root cellars, and the milk especially, until they had refrigerated cars, which was one of the downfalls of our rail service and milk service into New York City, was we used to be able to pack our Chapag train with ice and collect the milk and get it refrigerated down to New York or Bridgeport or wherever it went. Once the refrigerated cars came in, they could bring milk from way up in the northern part of New York State and Pennsylvania. And it really put a hurt on the dairy industry in this area, and was partly contributed to the end of our Chapag Railroad, especially the milk and dairy products, refrigerated cars. And that was the end of having to have ice. But up until the 1920s or 30s, most people had to preserve their, they had ice boxes, literally. I have an ice box here. I don't use it, but it's a linen storage. But yeah, harvesting ice was quite a thing. I don't know if Stephen has any pictures of ice harvesting where they had those huge saws and they would cut chunks in the ice by hand.
Yeah, there are a few. And I think the Swansons on New Preston Hill Road, they had an ice harvesting business there where they would go over to Lake Waramag and they would cut the ice. We've seen some pictures from that family, and they would sell it out of their small little ice house over there on New Preston Hill Road. Keith might remember that. Keith, do you remember the Swansons?
I've heard the story, but I remember the Swansons, but not the business itself.
Yeah, it was probably in the 1920s or 30s.
A little before my time.
Does anyone?
One thing I wanted to say about Waramag, I don't know exactly when East Shore Road was paved, but during the winter, I've heard stories that people would drive the length of Lake Waramag because there was no real good road alongside of it. And one of my relatives almost lost a car in there. This would have been back in the 20s or 30s.
Well, Keith, you're right. I remember even as recently as my high school experience of a few kids going out on Lake Waramag in their cars. And I distinctly remember somebody losing a car in the lake, whether it was back further or it was one of my vague contemporaries, but somebody, I mean, I can remember people taking their cars out on the ice and I mean, it's sort of an insanity, but there again, there was nothing else to do.
Now, this was back, I'm thinking in the early 1930s.
Yeah.
And East Shore Road was paved, but before that, it was apparently just a dirt road.
Yeah.
Not, you know, I'm listening, talking about all my parents or my grandparents telling me that story.
Yeah, I think people used to drive their cars on the, I think, I mean, there's again a whole other thing. I personally remember there was never a thing of the lakes not being frozen solid.
Right.
I mean, I just don't remember ever not hearing about the lake being frozen. And we're hearing stories now about up in the Great Lakes where they normally have been frozen and they're not. So we've obviously experienced, even though we have snow all over us, we're obviously experiencing some kind of a shift. I mean, I was very surprised when I drove by Lake Waramag last week and saw huge portions of it were still wide open.
Yeah, I remember when the whole thing would be. frozen.
Sure.
A story telling about myself. This was back in the 1980s. I had a dog, nice white Samoyed. I would walk her up to the lake. We'd go out on there, and I'd throw a stick for her or whatever. But she found a spot over where the casino used to be, and she fell through. I grabbed her by her leash or her collar, dragged her out, and we ran all the way back down where I live. Being the kind of dog she was, I gave her an aspirin, went to sleep. Next morning she was fine.
Well, that was a lucky break.
Yeah.
Well, lucky she was a winter dog.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm looking around here. I don't see anybody has any other stories. We should have somebody out here has some more stories about their winter times. No?
Well, one, I don't know, it was 1968 or 69 when we had 2 blizzards, one in February and one in March. I don't know which one it was, but it was a Sunday night. And I went out to shovel the driveway. I missed Ed Sullivan that night. Next morning I looked out and you couldn't even see where I'd shoveled. I know that was in either 68 or 69. We had 2 blizzards, one in February, one in March. It made it difficult. Of course, I worked in Thomaston. I drove back and forth, and I missed a couple of days.
Well, I was living in New Haven from 65, 6 up until into the 70s. And for a good part of that time, I only had a motorcycle. And if you want to have fun in the winter, I don't recommend it. But driving a motorcycle in the winter, especially when it's snowing, is a hell of an experience, I have to say. But there were a few times that I actually came up from New Haven to Washington, and it probably, my outer clothing was probably frozen solid. I mean, I probably could step out of my jeans and leave them standing by the time I got home. Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing about winter that, I mean, as much as we complain about it, we all live here. And there's a certain kind of affection we have for the misery of it, I think. I don't know. I can't explain it. I don't do well in cold weather, and yet I'm out there today enjoying the fact that I got a chance to get out and do a little shoveling and get my walks cleared. And
I'll get my snowblower out in the morning.
Yeah, there you are. And there's something about that I tried to explain once to a friend of mine who lived in Florida. And I said, well, why would you live someplace where you have such miserable weather? And it took me a while, and I was there in the summer, and in the summer in Florida, I have to tell you, you're pretty much, you sort of have a slimy coat on you of, I don't know what it is, but the humidity and whatever. And I said, well, one thing is that in a seasonal climate, the winter kills everything. I mean, it's antiseptic. So all of the bacteria, all of the funguses, all of the stuff is basically killed, and you start every year fresh. And by the time you get into August, things are getting a little sticky, but then all of a sudden it starts cooling down, and the next thing you know, you have winter and you have 3 or 4 months of frozen weather, and nothing much lives through it. There may be something about that cycle that's very energizing to us, that managed to live through it. I don't think I could live in a uniform climate. I like having the variety, even if it's miserable. I leave it open to any of you to chime in on that one. I see a few heads nodding.
That's part of being a New Englander.
Yeah.
Born here, I'll die here.
You have to find things to do to pass the time, and they're fun, as we're talking about the activities.
Right.
So going back, way back in the 50s, riding with my father, who was a substitute school bus driver, out on the, and I don't know the name of the road, out by where Edwin Whitehead lives, like Calhoun. I don't know where that is, way up on the hill off of Baldwin Hill.
Popple Swamp.
I don't know the name. I can't remember, but I remember the drifts up there were higher than the school bus.
Wow, yeah.
I mean, and it was a treat for me because I always had to walk to school. So when he was substitute, so it was fun to ride a school bus, but I can still remember the drift and how high that was way back then.
Well, up on Popple Swamp where Whitehead's is, and you have the big open plateau.
Yeah, right.
And it just reminded me of something, and Mary may know about this, but it seemed to me that for a long, long time, and I don't see them anymore, but all the
I know what you're
fields used to have snow fencing.
Snow fences. I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
And I don't see snow fencing anymore, but that was one of the reasons, was that you would get these incredible drifts, and the snow fencing was the only thing that held it back.
That's right. Yep. You're absolutely right.
Mary, did your father put out snow fencing for the pastures?
Mary Bronson.
Yeah.
Not me. I lived in the depot. It's you.
Yeah, sorry, Mary, I don't know your last name, but anyway, I
Well,
had to wait.
Yeah. I'm a Belfonte that lived in the depot. My father had the hardware store.
Okay, good.
Valley Hardware, yeah.
We did put up snow fencing, but it was usually put up on the ridge lines, like on the way to Roxbury or up where Edwin lived, the Whiteheads, where it really drifted. We had trees to knock down some of the wind, but yeah, snow fences were a given.
Yeah.
And it may be that, technology and the trucks and plows got better and they could get through larger chunks of snow. And maybe that's why snow fences have gone away, but we always had them.
Well, I think one of the things too is that, and you don't think about this, but people planted tree lines or kept tree lines specifically so that there would be a windbreak across open fields, and that was a given, that you would have tree lines along your field edge, along your fields, to help break the wind and also the snow where you could. I mean, I think that we forget that people, I'm reminded of this every once in a while when I look around and I think, okay, so a couple of people on a horse or two came up from Woodbury in the 1700s, whenever it was. And they just sort of like wandered up through the woods and then sort of got up here somewhere and decided, oh, well, here's a good place to have a farm or a town or something. I mean, how did they know? I don't know. It still baffles me. But think about these people opening up their fields, moving all that stone which wasn't a decorative element. I mean, it was a specific, it was a necessity to be able to open the fields. And they did that in weather that is baffling to us. I mean, we're talking about, I mean, Keith talking about getting his snowblower out. I'm talking about shoveling a walk from one end of my door to the next. That's nothing compared to what these people had to do. And they did it with oxen, they did it with horses, they did it without mechanized equipment of any kind. How those people managed to live in the winter, and before them, the Native Americans and how they lived in the winter. I wish there was somebody here from the museum, Indian Institute, that could talk about how the Native Americans negotiated winter. But obviously they did, and for centuries before we even got here. And I think we really, I mean, it's something to really consider how hardy and remarkably ingenious people were in those days to be able to negotiate these seasonal changes. I open that for discussion if anybody wants to chime in on it.
Well, Dimmy, you mentioned before you got to the Indians and indigenous peoples in winter, you were talking about rocks in the fields and horses and oxen and things like that. But that's why we have all the beautiful stone walls, because the stone boats that you hauled behind your horse or your ox pulled behind it and you loaded stones on it is what took the stones out of the field.
Yeah. And you know, the intelligent thing to do was not take them far. So you would outline your field lines with the stone and you would pile them up along those lines so that and it helped the cattle to some extent, keep them within a certain pasture. But whether it was cattle or agriculture, you had to get the stone out of the fields, and there was a lot of it, and there was nothing else to do with it. And it wasn't perfect stone walls, I can tell you that right now. They weren't masonry walls, they were just well stacked up stone. And I'd heard a story, maybe some of you know about this. I'd heard a story that when an animal, like a horse or a cow, died out in the pasture, and they weren't able to butcher it because it had been dead for too long, they would just drag the carcass to the edge of the stone wall and then cover it with stone to keep the animals from getting at it. And I had heard that as a boy, and I found one of those stone mounds next to a stone wall, and I dug into it, and lo and behold, I found a horse and a horse skeleton. And I even found out what had killed it, because in the jaw of the skeleton was a nail stuck between two of its teeth. Oh. And it must have somehow been grazing and bit down on that nail, and it must have killed it with tetanus.
Oh, wow.
And I managed to get a couple of passing grades for show and tell by bringing in pieces of that horse for a few years. I think at one point I even reconstructed the hoof and the shoe all the way up to the shoulder.
Was that was that on Horse Heaven Road?
No, but you know, that makes me think that may have been why it was called that.
I asked somebody about that one time, and the answer I got is simply that's where people buried horses. On that
yeah, it makes sense to me. Because I mean, if you had a dead animal that you couldn't harvest, you weren't going to take it far, and it wasn't the kind of thing you could easily dig a hole for. I mean, nowadays we get a backhoe in and they dig a hole and okay, it's done. But they didn't have backhoes. So, you know, who's going to shovel a grave big enough for a horse or a cow? I wouldn't. So, yeah, it was sensible. You know, try to dig a shallow grave and cover it with stones. There are lots of stones. But there was a little bit of controversy a few months or a year or so ago. People on Slaughterhouse Road wanted to change the name of the road from Slaughterhouse Road to something less unpleasant. And there was a fair amount of pushback.
Oh, yeah.
Pointing out that it was a slaughterhouse road because there'd been a slaughterhouse there. I don't know where the slaughterhouse was, but you know, it was Slaughterhouse Road for a reason, and it was going to stay that way. I suppose the people wanted a better address.
We have a question in the chat box. Does anyone here remember horse-drawn sleighs in Washington? And if so, what years approximately do you remember seeing those? Were there any farmers that were pulling sleighs around town?
Wow. I have a vague memory of Henry Van Sinderen riding around in a horse-drawn sleigh. Does anybody remember something about that? I know that Dr. Worsby used to have a horse-drawn sleigh that he made house calls in. I think, Stephen, when you opened up that barn, didn't you have some evidence of his horse-drawn sleigh?
Yeah, yep. And I think there's a photograph too of him sleighing around town to visit his patients.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he stored his horse in the former garage/barn over at his house there in Wickham.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you all that somebody must have had a horse-drawn sleigh here, because it's been in my house since we moved in, and it was originally in the attic. And at one point, we brought it down and put it in when we had to do some repairs to the front window, picture window where the barn door used to be. And we decided it would be a good idea to get it out of the attic and bring it in and put it in the living room. And we hadn't thought this through very well, because once the front window was repaired, I suddenly realized there would be no way for that sleigh to ever be moved out of the house, because there was no longer a door big enough for it to get out. But it was a horse-drawn sleigh, and it's still in pretty good shape, and it sits in my living room. My cat likes it. But I'm trying to think. Mary, you were in a buggy. There's a picture of you in a buggy, but that was a different thing. That was for a Dramamine play, wasn't there?
That was many, many moons ago. Yes, that was a Dramamine play, and that was a buggy that I think might have come out of our barn attic, and it was pulled by Sparkle Potter.
Yeah, because I remember that it was you were promoting a Dramamine play.
That's right. Green Grow the Lilacs, and that was Fred Bird.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Was driving.
Yeah. But it seems to me, I remember there had been a few occasions when people had a horse and sleigh out, and I don't remember who it was, but why I think Henry Van Sinderen.
My mother used to talk about a man who always had a horse-drawn sleigh up on the green, and take the children for rides every winter. This would have been in the 20s.
Yeah.
But I can't remember his name.
It wasn't.
Pardon me?
I don't think it was Harry. I think it was Harry's brother that owned the Devereaux.
Ah.
Yeah, that they would be all over. But Horse Heaven Road was Bertha Ney, NYE, which was part of the Smith farm, or became Smith, and now is Waldingfield. And that is true, that's the road is named that because they own that whole property, and they would bury their horses on the farm.
Wow. Great.
Now we know. Now I know.
Well done. I mean, we don't name roads for no reason.
Exactly. And as far as winter like wonderlands that are happening in Washington. I grew up on a horse farm in Washington, and the greatest fun was having my mother with her Palomino. She would drag us on a very, very long sled, the line was long, and she would run through the fields and make the horse do these circles. So we would be, like thrown around. Oh yeah, it was
Yeah.
just the most amazing fun. And that the horse would do it and not get upset while we're screaming and falling off and, whatever. It was a lot of great fun. Another good thing, in the wintertime, you can't find water for the horses because the ponds freeze, and we would try to chop. We'd use the axes and everything and try to chop the water, but it would freeze over again, and you'd chop again. And then it finally got to a point where you couldn't get the ice out of the pond, so you'd find a spring. And we would take our horses, and we had 40 head, so you got used to taking 4 abreast, a ride 1, lead 3, going down through the field till you went to the spring. And the spring was only so big, so you would just let one drink at a time. So obviously you got off, let each horse drink their fill, which is very important, and then try to find a rock to get back up on and bring them back through and go through the next set. And then, of course, you're not doing it by yourself because there's another somebody coming behind with 4 more horses and another somebody, So it was really a huge business to get the animals watered in the wintertime. It was huge.
Wow.
How many horses did you say?
We had 40 of our own. Yeah. So
Wow.
yeah. So it was a big thing. I mean, you're talking about 10 runs
Yeah.
of 4 horses. And I mean, you're doing it in winter like you had today, like weather that you had today. Of course, it doesn't make so much difference because you're not on a road, you're just going through the fields. But when I explain that to my neighbors right now, like, I want to go see your spring. They're like, my what? Yeah.
How old were you?
Probably 12. Yeah. But it could have been, later than that also. But it's what you needed to do to get the animals watered. And cows are the same way. Cows usually will find the spring. Horses are usually kept fenced in. The cow has a bigger area, to find a place.
Wow. Yeah, I know I had a friend who was taking care of a few horses for somebody, and that was their main anxiety was during the winter trying to get to the barn and then try to break the ice, try to get water in there. Sometimes they would have to carry water with them and then fill the trough when they got there because they wouldn't have any water. The regular trough would be frozen solid and they couldn't open it up. And that was it was a real concern to that person taking care of those animals.
Well,
And
you can't just let them have snow. They can't get enough.
Yeah.
They really need to consume water. So that was a very big. And the other really fun thing was getting food out to them when they're out in the field. And the greatest fun was having a snowmobile, which my dad finally got. And it was like you put the hay bale on the back of the snowmobile and run it out through the field. And I mean, the horses going as fast as you are as you're throwing off the hay and everything. But then all of a sudden we could go all through these fields, I mean, we had a snowmobile. And when Susie was talking about the snow, how bad the snow drifts were and everything, we had that stupid snowmobile and we decided to go around the block, which is down East Street, up Bell Hill, over, what do you call it? Anyways, around again to East Street and down to Washington or to Wickham Road, and going through the drifts and going up a drift that was as high as a school bus and down and hitting just plain old road because the drift was blown, the wind had blown all the snow off. So you're just going up and bam and up and bam. And it was like, wow, who likes a snowmobile? I hate these things. But yeah, it was fun. Good things.
How
It's
old
like,
were you doing that?
Same 14, 16, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I've
Pete Locke-
I've seen younger children on snowmobiles out in fields and whipping across the road before you can.
I know, but these were when they were brand new. They were
Yeah.
like a new thing.
A new
But Pete
thing.
Locke, yeah, Pete Locke growing up in town used to say how I used to sit on the telephone wires, on the telephone poles. Anyway, I don't know if that's true or not, but
Well, we'll take Pete at his word.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Good
I
story.
miss Pete.
Yeah, definitely.
There was a story, I think, in Billy Bader's book about one of the big blizzards. And I think it was, I can't remember now, maybe Stephen knows, whether it was his brother or his father, but they'd gone to visit relatives on some other part of town, like in Warren or someplace like that. And the snows were so bad that the relative couldn't get back to Washington for most of the winter. You remember him telling that story?
I think it might have been the blizzard of 1888, right? That's the big one in the 1880s.
So it would have been his father or somebody like that.
Yeah, or maybe his grandfather.
Yeah. Because he had a story of tunneling out of his house to get down to the depot too. But that was Billy Bader, you never know.
Good stories though.
There's another one that too bad we don't have him here now, because he could have taken up the whole hour with just a bunch of stories. It would have been great to hear.
You have to say hello.
Yeah.
Dimitri,
Yeah, Brendan.
how are you, man?
Good.
Good. I'm chiming in a late fashion, but I have a personal question. Then I'll share a story about winter. Mary Belfonte,
Yes.
is Michael still with us?
Yes.
Where is he?
Who am I talking with? Brendan Floyce?
Yes.
Oh, okay. He's in Charleston, South Carolina. He's retired.
Ah, good. Well, we were best of friends, and tell him I said hi. I have no recollection of or where he was or any of that, but good.
Yeah.
So I have stories for my winter. Two of them, which I'll share, is one of them in front of Randy's supermarket along Route 47. Was in the wintertime, there would be 7 or 8 of us that would gather to do nothing but just find trouble. And we would put up an arsenal of snowballs, and the better the snow was packed, the better. And whenever a truck came through in front of Parks Drug, you could see it coming either down the Green Hill or down from Baldwin Hill. We loaded up and assaulted that truck the best we could with snowballs. And we were never in trouble for doing that. Whereas today, it just wouldn't be permissible. But that was one of the things that I did before I learned how to drive. But my family owned Corvairs. And for you who didn't know that, the Corvairs, much to Ralph Nader's, he wanted to unsafe at any speed. But the Corvairs were, for me, a wonderful thing to have in the winter, because they were rear-wheel drive. They were heavy in the butt, and you could go anywhere. I could drive that car places that no other two-wheel drive car could go, and had many escapades with many of my friends, and we survived them all.
Well, Brendan, I have to tell you that I had a Corvair and it almost killed me. It was partly my fault. I was we were visiting some friends over in Middlebury, or Middletown, anyway, coming back down from there past Quassapog, there's a couple of double S curves. And
Yeah.
I was following Tim Cooney, who was in his MG. It was at night, and Tim just cut a straight line through the curves because you could see what was coming. It was nighttime. There were no headlights. So he just cut the line straight through the curves. And I was behind him in our Corvair. Thank you very much. And I took the same line he did, except when I got into the second set of curves, there was a car coming and I had to hold the curve. And the Corvair swung out on its rear axle, broke the seals on the tires, threw me out the passenger door across whatever that road is, 63, 67.
Mm-hmm.
Threw me across the road. And then as I was rolling across the highway, I watched my car making this big arc towards me. And it went up on the embankment on the other side of the road and stopped. Otherwise, it would have run me over.
Huh.
And he came back to get me. Some guy stopped and asked me if I wanted a cigarette. I said, I only smoke half and half cigarettes at the time. He said, well, that's what I smoke. So we must have been the only two people in Litchfield County who smoked those cigarettes then. And my girlfriend at the time was on her way back from a completely separate event. And she saw me, and I can still visualize her running across the highway in her little pencil skirt with their legs flying out on either side because you can't run in those things. And she was hysterical. And eventually I was taken to the hospital, and the next day the state cop came and he said, I was amazed to find you in one bed. And I said, why? And he said, we measured from where your car skidded and hit the guardrail and threw you out to where your sweater was shredded all over the highway, and it was 40 feet. And all that had happened to me was that I broke a couple of ribs as I went through the passenger door. And, but yeah, that's the Corvair for you. Thank you very much for reminding me, Brendan. I appreciate
no
that.
problem. Yep, I went through multiple Corvairs.
Oh, you did? Oh, good. So I don't feel bad then. They were unbelievably deadly car.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But great fun.
Yeah.
In the winter, especially.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, in those days, the rear-wheel drive cars, I mean, it was the first time I got into a front-wheel drive car in the snow, I was all over the place because I was still braking and steering the way a rear-wheel car drives.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't quite work the same in a front-wheel drive car.
No.
Hey, Brendan, did they take you down to the school parking lot and have you spin around?
I never did anything like that, Dimitri.
Never, no. Such a good boy.
Yeah. No. that was a turf that I wasn't allowed on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm just joking with you. Of course we did that. Of course.
So how are we doing, Stephen?
We're just about at our closing point. So if there's any last questions or comments from anyone about winters in Washington, feel free to chime in, raise your hands.
Or winters, period.
Right.
I just want to say it's a great place to have grown up and spent my time. Good
Yeah.
memory.
Yes.
Yeah, very true. And I think we're all really a testament to the survival rate. But I think you're absolutely right, Mary. Growing up in this town, whether it was winter or any other time, was a real gift. Yeah, Tara. Unmute yourself. Right, you still, there you go.
There, I just want to say, not only was it fun growing up, it's fun to be here now.
Yes,
It's such a pleasure to be with all of you, friends from the town that are still here, and being able to share this time and our thoughts. It's really great.
yeah, I also want to mention something. I mean, now that you brought it up, just recently, Jim Britton was interviewed on the radio about our COVID vaccine outreach. And apparently, we're one of the few towns in the state that has organized a volunteer corps to reach out and make sure that all of our elderly citizens are being given appointments for vaccines. And they're calling around town and making sure that people know how to sign up. And if they are having trouble signing up, they sign them up, make sure that they're getting their vaccines. They've gone through the over 75s and they're now working their way through the 65 and up to 75. And that's a totally a volunteer effort that we've done singly. And I hope that it's a model for other communities, but it's a testament to the kind of community we live in.
Exactly. Yeah, it's great.
Yep.
I'm
Well,
probably
okay.
gonna call.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you for putting this organizing this and for everybody chiming in. And if anybody has any more stories, you should definitely send them over to Stephen. He can add them to the record. And the next event is going to be really interesting to talk about the Washington Art Association, the history of it. And again, it's a testament to the kind of uniqueness of this community that we've had an art association for 70 years. And that we've had an incredible opportunity to have that institution available to enrich the town. And it should be a very interesting talk, and I look forward to it. And thank you all. Good to have seen you all. Thank you for joining in.
Thanks,
Good
Demi.
night. Thank you, Demi.
All
Good night.
right. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Everyone.
Bye.